I still remember the exact sound of the conference room that day, the way the laughter echoed after my boss introduced my replacement. But this morning, sitting here in my own office, the sound is nothing more than a faint ghost. The sunlight spills across the glass desk in front of me, glinting against the gold nib of my pen. My silk blouse feels cool against my skin as I lean back in the chair, one leg crossed neatly over the other. The world outside my window is a blur of steel and sky, New York humming at its usual pace, while inside these walls, I command my own rhythm. On the desk, my phone vibrates with a soft buzz. A new calendar reminder, meeting at 11 a.m. with Michael Grant. I smile, though the curve of my lips carries a private weight. Michael Grant, my old boss, the man who once stood at the head of a room full of executives and announced I was no longer needed. He hadn't whispered it behind closed doors. No, he'd taken my dignity and laid it on the table like a joke. I smoothed the edge of my sleeve, steadying the quiet thrum in my chest. Back then, I had no power. But now, every detail in this office, from the leather-bound contracts stacked neatly in front of me to the engraved nameplate resting at the edge of the desk, reminds me how far I've come. And today, of all days, Michael will be reminded too. 2 years ago, I walked into that same conference room with a hopeful heart. I had worked for Grant & Associates for almost 5 years, pouring every ounce of energy, loyalty, and late-night caffeine into making the company thrive. That morning, I wore my favorite navy dress. I even polished my heels the night before, wanting to look sharp for the quarterly meeting where Michael had promised big news. I thought maybe, finally, he would recognize me in front of the team, the woman who had carried half of his projects on her shoulders while he played golf on Fridays. Instead, I sat frozen as he cleared his throat, grinned broadly, and gestured toward a young man standing beside him. "Everyone, meet Tyler Brooks," Michael announced, his voice dripping with pride. "Our new senior account manager. He'll be taking over Jessica's responsibilities starting today." My heart sank so hard I thought the entire room must have heard it. I forced a polite smile, though inside I was crumbling. Laughter bubbled across the table, not cruel, but awkward, people unsure how to respond. Tyler gave me a half nod, embarrassed but eager to step into my chair. I wanted to say something. My hands curled tightly in my lap, nails digging crescents into my palms. My throat burned with words I couldn't release. Michael didn't even look at me. He just moved on to the next agenda item as if I'd been erased with the swipe of a pen. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at my grandmother's old leather-bound notebook, the one she'd given me when I graduated college. Inside the first page, in her delicate handwriting, she had written, "When they close the door on you, build your own house." I traced those words with trembling fingers, the ink smudged slightly from years of turning the page. And I realized I would never give Michael Grant the satisfaction of watching me beg for scraps. So the next morning, I packed my things in silence, walked out of that office with my head high, and promised myself that one day, I wouldn't just rebuild. I would rise so high he'd have no choice but to look up. The weeks after I left Grant & Associates were some of the hardest of my life. For the first time in years, I woke up without an alarm clock, without a neatly stacked calendar full of meetings, without anyone waiting on me to solve their problems. At first, it felt like freedom. But then came the fear. The savings in my account looked smaller with every passing week, and job interviews ended with polite handshakes and, "We'll be in touch." It was as if Michael's public dismissal had marked me invisible to the industry I had given everything to. I remember one night in particular, sitting in my tiny Brooklyn apartment, the city buzzing outside my window, while I hunched over my grandmother's notebook, scribbling ideas in the margins. I wrote down every skill I had, every strength no one had ever valued: client management, strategy, storytelling. And slowly, one idea began to take shape. I didn't need a boss. I needed clients. So I started small. I emailed local startups, offering to help them pitch to investors. My first client was a coffee roaster from Queens who could barely afford my modest fee. I stayed up all night refining his pitch deck, and when he called me a week later to say he'd landed his funding, I cried quietly into my pillow. It wasn't about the money, it was about knowing I could stand on my own. The months that followed tested every ounce of me. Some nights I fell asleep at my laptop, my face pressed against the keyboard. Other days I battled rejection after rejection. Doors slammed before I could even explain my vision. But there were also tiny victories, moments that kept me going. Like the day a small tech startup in Soho invited me into their loft-style office. The founder, a woman named Emily Rhodes, looked at me with a mix of curiosity and fatigue. "You don't look like the typical consultant," she said, almost dismissive. I wanted to shrink, but instead I told her the truth. "That's because I'm not. I'm here to build, not just advise." She gave me a chance. Within 3 months, her company had doubled its investor base. Emily became more than a client. She became a mentor, a believer when I needed one most. From there, the referrals trickled in. One project turned into two, two into five. I reinvested every cent I earned, renting a tiny shared office space in Lower Manhattan. I painted the walls myself, dragged in a second-hand desk, and called it my headquarters. I never bragged online. My LinkedIn profile remained modest, my Instagram filled only with coffee cups and city sunsets. To the outside world, even to old colleagues, I was just another woman hustling to stay afloat. But in reality, I was building an empire in silence. Every rejection I had endured, every smirk Michael once threw my way, became fuel. And though I didn't know it then, the day would come when all those long nights, all that hidden work, would lead me back to the very man who had once erased me from his world. The conference room smelled faintly of leather and polished wood. The long mahogany table gleamed beneath the chandelier lights, reflecting back the faces of board members seated neatly in their chairs. I sat at the head of the table, posture tall, my notebook open before me, pen poised in my hand. My nameplate, Jessica Lane, CEO, caught the light just enough to be seen but not flaunted. The door opened. Michael Grant stepped inside. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. His once confident stride was slower now, his sharp jawline softened by stress. But when his eyes swept across the room and landed on me, the mask of arrogance slipped back into place. "Jessica," he said with a thin smile, as though we were old friends reuniting. "Didn't expect to see you here." I met his gaze calmly. "On the contrary, Michael. You're here because of me." He blinked, confusion crossing his face before he laughed lightly, dismissing the idea. He glanced around at the other board members, as if waiting for someone to correct me. No one did. Slowly, realization began to creep into his expression. His eyes flicked to the nameplate, then to the documents spread before me. "You're the CEO?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying disbelief. "Yes," I said evenly. "Of the firm that just acquired Grant and Associates." Silence swallowed the room. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to pause. Michael's face drained of color. He pulled out a chair and sat stiffly, his jaw clenched. This must be some kind of mistake." I leaned forward slightly, folding my hands. "No mistake. I built this company from the ground up, brick by brick, contract by contract. And when the opportunity arose to acquire yours, I didn't hesitate." His breath hitched, though he tried to cover it with a cough. For the first time, I saw the cracks in his armor, the insecurity, the desperation hiding beneath his polished exterior. I let the silence stretch, savoring the irony. 2 years ago, he had announced my replacement with theatrical flourish, reducing me to nothing in front of a crowd. Now it was his turn to squirm under the weight of a truth he couldn't escape. Finally, I slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward him. A letter. Simple, direct, final. "Your termination," I said softly. He stared at it as if it were written in a foreign language. His hand trembled as he picked it up, his eyes scanning the words, searching for some loophole that wasn't there. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted gently, my voice steady, firm. "Because I am the majority shareholder now. And because leadership requires respect, a currency you ran out of long ago." He looked at me, his eyes a storm of anger and humiliation. But beneath it all, I saw fear. The same fear I had once felt when he erased me in front of my peers. Only this time, the power dynamic had shifted. "You set me up," he whispered bitterly. "No," I replied. "You set yourself up the day you underestimated me." Gasps echoed faintly around the table. No one dared to intervene. Michael slumped back into his chair, his bravado collapsing like a house of cards. He held the letter in one hand, defeated. I leaned back, my tone calm, but cutting. 2 years ago, you replaced me in public. Today, I replace you with your own signature on that page. The irony tasted sweet, but I didn't gloat. Instead, I let the weight of justice settle over the room. The board members exchanged glances, some astonished, others quietly impressed. For me, it wasn't about spectacle anymore. It was about closure. Michael lowered his gaze to the table, unable to meet my eyes again. And in that moment, I knew the power he had once stolen from me was never truly his to keep. It was always mine. Michael sat frozen, the termination letter limp in his hand. The board members avoided his eyes, some scribbling notes they didn't need to take, others staring at the glossy table as though it might swallow them whole. I let the silence breathe before I spoke. "Michael," I said softly, "you taught me something important, though not in the way you intended. When you humiliated me, I learned the cost of silence. I promised myself I would never stay quiet in the face of disrespect again." He shifted uncomfortably, his knuckles white against the edge of the paper. "I could end this right here," I continued. "Escort you out, strip you of your titles, let your name be whispered as nothing more than a cautionary tale. But I believe in something stronger than revenge." He looked up then, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "I believe in accountability." The words hung heavy in the air. "You will leave this company today," I said firmly, "but not without conditions. Conditions that reflect the damage you've done and the chance to choose better." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Conditions? You think you can dictate my life now?" "I don't need to dictate," I replied calmly. "I'm giving you a choice. One you never gave me." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "First, you will provide mentorship to 5 young professionals in this industry, people you once overlooked. You'll use your knowledge, not your ego, to guide them. Second, you will publicly acknowledge your mistakes. A statement, not just about stepping down, but about respecting the people who built the foundation beneath you. And third," I paused, letting him absorb each word, "you will not attempt to undercut, sabotage, or malign this company. Not because I fear you, but because I expect you to rise above the man you once were." His lips pressed into a thin line, his pride visibly battling his circumstances. "And if I refuse?" he asked bitterly. I tilted my head slightly, almost with pity. "Then you'll confirm exactly why you were never fit to lead." The board members shifted, some nodding in quiet agreement. The weight of the room was no longer on me. It was on him. For the first time in our history, Michael Grant had no cards left to play. I softened my tone, though not my stance. "Michael, this isn't just about you. It's about every person you dismissed, every career you trampled on. You once took my dignity in public. Today, I return yours in private. What you do with it from here, that's your choice." He sat there, shoulders slumping, his arrogance draining like water through a sieve. For a flicker of a moment, I thought I saw something human in his expression, regret, maybe even shame. Finally, with a shaky hand, he slid the termination letter back toward me, signed in ink. I picked it up, my grip steady. His chapter here was over. But the story of what came next for both of us was just beginning. Because power, I realized, wasn't about crushing someone under your heel. It was about setting the terms, drawing the lines, and knowing you could walk away without ever looking back. And that was something Michael Grant would never forget. After the meeting, the boardroom emptied one by one, their footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. I remained seated for a moment, staring at the signed letter in my hand. The paper was ordinary, white, creased slightly where Michael had pressed too hard with the pen. But to me, it carried the weight of every sleepless night, every whispered doubt, every moment I had once thought I wouldn't survive. I slipped it into a folder, closed my notebook, and exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, I felt light. Later that evening, I walked into my office alone. The city's skyline glittered against the glass walls, each light a reminder of how far I had come. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk and reached for the old leather notebook my grandmother had given me. Its cover was worn now, corners frayed, pages filled with scribbles, strategies, and late-night thoughts. But there it was, her handwriting on the very first page. When they close the door on you, build your own house. I smiled softly, running my finger over the faded ink. She had given me those words as a young graduate, hopeful and naive. Today, they weren't just advice. They were prophecy fulfilled. Michael's face lingered in my mind, not as the man who had once destroyed me, but as a symbol of everything I had overcome. I didn't hate him anymore. Hatred was too heavy a burden to carry. What I felt instead was clarity. He had been the fire that burned me down, yes. But he had also been the spark that forced me to rise again, stronger and unshakable. And as I stood there, watching the city pulse with life, I realized something profound. My journey was never about revenge. It was about reclamation, about taking back the voice I had lost, the dignity I had buried, and the future I had nearly abandoned. I closed the notebook gently, sliding it back into the drawer. The story wasn't about Michael Grant anymore. It was about Jessica Lane.
Me.
The woman who was once publicly replaced, and who now signed the letter that ended her boss's reign.